What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your NASCAR, DFS, and betting home. Today, we are talking all things playoffs with Chris Werme. Brian's here before his trip out to Las Vegas. We'll get into the odds, we'll get into the storylines, and we'll get into who we think can actually make the Final Four, all in today's Angle of Pursuit.
Ross Chastain used the wall all the way around this racetrack.
Logano has been the class of the field.
Check out the big brain on Brad.
Yeah, I need to change my underwear.
All right, guys, the NASCAR season, regular season, is in the books. We have our 16 drivers. We have our 10 racetracks that we will be heading to. And Brian, we had to call in the big guns today to help us figure out where the value is, who we should be focusing on, and see if there's a way to make money. And Chris Werme is that big gun. Chris, how's everything going?
Oh, man. Awesome. Coming off of an off week for me. So excited for the playoffs and in one of my favorite tracks. I love Darlington. So excited to get the playoffs rolling.
Yeah, you're smarter than Brian and I. You just avoid the nonsense that is super speedways, even if you feel like you have the winner in your hand. The race tends to find a way to make things interesting. Brian,
I was just gonna say there is no such thing as an edge at super speedway tracks.
No, because we talked about it before. We said we shouldn't be doing this, and we loaded up the cart and pulled the trigger, and well, here we are. So, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the regular season before we dive in, because obviously there's a lot to get into.
Mm-hmm.
We have no Chase Elliott in the playoffs. I think Chris, like, what would you have made that from a book's perspective to not make the playoffs? Insane.
Oh, man. It would have to have been like a scenario where if he started every race, I mean, minus 2,000, right? Like I would say that was. Now, I don't know that. We very rarely see injuries. I think we've seen it more in the last couple of years, right? With this car, we now see, we see a lot of drivers doing a lot of other things. Kyle Larson kind of set the stage for, even Alex Bowman's situation where he ends up missing a couple races. So I think before the Larson stuff, I would have said minus 2,000. But now I think that, I don't know. That's a great question. I didn't think that was coming. I don't know. That's like, you did not expect it. And you can only see it once it happens, right? Like once he's out for 6 races, but then you still think he's going to win, right? Yeah. Especially as fast as the 5 and the 24 were early in the season. Well, obviously the 9's going to have some speed and they're going to get a win. I don't know. I think you just got to be a little bit more careful when it comes to betting. I don't know how you even know that. Like, I didn't even know he was a snowboarder, right?
I think it's just kind of a one-off thing that you really can't factor into too much. But Brian, we talked about our to make the Final Four odds before the season even started. He was like plus 130, plus 120, something like that. Like it's
plus 110 to make the championship 4, which is what we have. So I mean, that just goes to show you, like, he was probably, to Chris's point, like minus 2,000 or minus 2,500 if a book had that open just to make the playoffs. But like you said in the same breath, like, you can never account for somebody's off track, fun to get in the way and have him miss 6 races. But you also look back to, even while he was out, his championship futures were still amongst like the top 5 on the board, like the 5 shortest numbers. And then he comes back, and even the first couple of races where he didn't look as good, he was still among the favorites to win the championship. So the books definitely worked in his past into that. So, you're never going to see or you can't expect to see something like this happen again.
Chris, was there anything else for you for the regular season that really jumped out, surprised you? Maybe someone that really impressed you? Christopher Buescher.
Bless you. I think Chris Buescher's kind of the easy one.
Yeah.
I would say just the standard disappearance of Hendrick from about Darlington on. I thought, there was no one that had speed to win races after that. Like, it's one thing to not win Darlington or Kansas or Dover, where I thought that Larson arguably had the best car. It's another thing to just kind of disappear at Charlotte, Gateway, Sonoma, a track where the 5 has been phenomenal. you know, I think that's kind of the most shocking thing. And also a place like Michigan where you'd think that the Hendrick guys would be fast. I mean, of course, then you go to Watkins Glen, and I think that Larson was probably the fastest car. I know I might be a little biased because I had a large bet on him, but you know, it was William Byron and Larson all of a sudden showing up the week before Daytona, which is, you know, you still want to show speed, I think, heading into the playoffs. So I think that was kind of the biggest shock because Larson, I thought Larson and Byron were so fast in those first, 13 races. And then for them to not even really be in the conversation up until Watkins Glen, I thought was a little bit surprising.
Yeah, and Brian, it's kind of interesting because that seems about the point where like Byron was clearly locked into the playoff. Like he had gotten a few wins. You know, they kind of focused more on Bowman and on Elliott at that point. But obviously with Elliott coming back, I think the second time after spinning out some, who did he intentionally wreck?
It was Denny.
Denny,
he hooked.
Yeah. So interesting run of things. But I think I'm wondering if that had a little bit like they tried to square peg round hole Chase Elliott and Alex Bowman, and they just I don't know if it was their cars or what was going on, but they weren't there.
Well, part of me kind of believes in the past, because Hendrick has always been, amongst the best garages in the sport, and they've always been pretty secure in the playoffs. That ring of races, you heard William Byron say it, none of these really translate to the playoffs.
None.
So they're not used to going into those races, looking to win that. They're still kind of part of their brain is already on the playoffs, at that point of the season. Whereas now they had to adjust and they're like, oh shit, we got to try to actually win these races and do something that we haven't done in years. So I wonder if that also had something to do with that.
1000%. I think that makes a lot of sense. Chris, was there anybody from more of like a negative perspective that you expected to find more checker flags or show speed, like Trackhouse? Like, can we put them in a similar camp as Hendrick? Is like they showed speed early and then just kind of disappeared.
Yeah, you could probably say Trackhouse. I always wonder kind of that conversation that Mr. H had with Chevy that kind of came down, and I think that that's probably gone. I think that nostalgia or the is gone now. I think that Trackhouse probably, and I'm guessing, so this is not me knowing anything, this is pure speculation, they probably spent a significant amount of their resources, and after listening to the front row situation with Denny and Michael McDowell on Action Sentimental, like resources are finite with some of these teams that aren't Hendrick and Gibbs, and maybe Trackhouse was just kind of spending all of their resources on this 99 team and trying to get them into the playoffs. And I'm hoping things kind of turn around for Ross.
Yeah.
But I would say Chris Bell has been really disappointing this year. If you look at, everything that I do comes through an odds lens, right? I can't, everything is through, relative to their price. And Chris Bell went off, he was the favorite in a few races. He's been very rarely over 10-1 week in and week out. And when has he had the best car? Like he lucked into a win, in my opinion. I thought that there was just some terrible decisions made on pit road when it comes to Chris Bell getting a win. So I think he's probably been the biggest disappointment of this year based on what we saw last year out of that 20 team.
Yeah, and Brian, I wonder, like, maybe getting the wins down the stretch the way he did and getting into the Final Four, maybe there was he got vaulted into a class that he might not be ready, or maybe shouldn't have been put into yet, just because of those strong finish. And we remember all the good finishes and remember the multiple wins and how dominant he looked. Maybe we anointed him just a little bit too early.
Are you trying to say that Christopher Bell was just the better version of Chase Briscoe coming into the year? How after what Chase Briscoe did during the playoffs early, before the season started, a lot of us,
I don't know if I want to go that far, just because
all in Chase Briscoe, playoff 4 contender. Yeah, no. I definitely think there is something to that, but Bell had shown tremendous speed last year already, and then coming into this year, like it had looked like he was coming off of 2022, maybe the best Toyota on a consistent basis. after the season coming into 2023, and he was on the ascension while Martin Truex Jr. was on his way out, and then Denny's contract situation was coming up, and then you had rookie Ty Gibbs. So I mean, I don't think the expectations were wrong necessarily. It's just maybe it was too soon.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if we get a little better odds on him going into next season, depending how the playoffs go and all that good stuff. But maybe we can buy back in a little bit off of a little bit of a frustrating year. I also think it was the year of just like pit road madness. Like contenders not being able to get it onto pit road or having stuff like issues with getting tires off, getting the wedge wrench out. Like it just seems like there would be somebody who had a very real shot at winning the race, looked like the best car for the majority of the day, and then something would happen in stage 3 and it would just flip the race on its head and they would have no shot.
You asking me or confirming? Like, I agree. Yeah, I've lost a ton of money on Chris Bell outrights this year. I mean, he looks so good in practice. I've almost like written him off as like not that he's unbettable, but he's unbettable at a 6, 7 to 8 to 1 price. Like if you're getting single digit, outright prices, the mistakes have just been so massive. And although he has been able to work his way back up through the field, and I think that that's really important. Like if you're going to bet someone to win a race, or you're going to take someone to matchups, you better bet your ass that they can work their way back up through the field. There's a few drivers that can't do that. And Chris Bell is one of those guys that can recover, but the mistakes have come late, or they've just come so early. Where was it? Loudon, where he just couldn't get back up through the field. Like he made a lot of passes, but I don't even know that he made his way back up to the top 10. That's a tough deal. You cannot make mistakes on pit road, period, end of story. Yeah. Unless there's very few tracks where you can do that. I would say Darlington fits in that category. I would say Homestead fits in that category. Any other track, you ain't doing it. There's no spin and win. There's no such thing as like that used to happen all the time. We were talking about with Jeff Gluck on the Stay Green podcast. Like people used to spin and win. Mm-hmm. Now you spin, it's like, okay, let's salvage. You're in damage control. Yep. And we see way more issues on pit road with just the one lug, especially under green flag stops. I mean, how many times have we seen a loose tire or a loose wheel, and it's cost the race for people? So I think that what William Byron has done is he has taken the recipe that the 19 took last year, hang around the top 4 or 5, and then be there at the end. Yep. Chris Bell has done the absolute opposite of that. Denny Hamlin, the opposite of that. So just be wary when betting those guys in the outright markets or even in the matchup markets that that they have to make their mistakes early. Otherwise, you're going to be out on that investment for sure.
Yeah. And Brian, I think especially with, talking pit road, William Byron has been incredible all year, but his pit team has been absolutely phenomenal. And that has been the difference between him finding a few more checkered flags, being there when it mattered most, and having a shot to win races.
Yeah, and I think we've said that on our pod multiple times. Like anytime William Byron puts it on pole and he gets the pit stall of choice, like he is going to be a contender regardless of what happens during the day, because that team is just so good on pit road. And the opposite can be said about a guy like Tyler Reddick, who I've been high on all season. Yeah. Comes to the track with tremendous speed, but it's either him losing a tire because they didn't tighten it right, or he's speeding down pit road, or he's driving the car too hard, getting into the wall.
And that stuff's going to matter as we turn our attention towards the playoffs. You're going to have to make good decisions. You're going to need your pit crew to be able to do math and figure out how much gas you have in the tank. You're going to need to be able to get it to the end and make some serious noise. So let's spin this forward. Let's look at some odds. Let's talk about if there's potential value. Obviously, you could be holding some nice tickets from the preseason to win the Cup Championship. But if we're just diving into the market or we're looking for an additional exposure, let's see if we can't find some value and potentially find a driver or two where the numbers make some sense. So obviously we are entering round of 16 where we have Darlington, Kansas, and Bristol. Round 12 will take us to Texas, Talladega, and Charlotte. Round of 8 will be Vegas, Homestead, and Martinsville. And then obviously finalizing at the championship. And let me throw this up really quick so you can see the 16 drivers that made the championship. 16. So Some big heavy hitters, some interesting names, some younger guys, some older guys, a good mix of the field. Brian, I guess I'll start with you. Any initial jumping off thoughts? Anyone you're really excited to see perform? Anyone jumping out to you from an odds perspective that you're excited about for the playoff run?
Well, I definitely think that these first two races at Darlington and Kansas are extremely important for those guys that are currently below the cut line, because once we get to Bristol, that's going to throw a lot of these guys in for a loop, because somebody like Bubba Wallace, like, he's not known to be good at Bristol, or Kevin Harvick, he may be good at Bristol, but like, you don't want to go into that race needing a victory, and just the type of close contact driving we've seen with these cars and how easy those toe links get bent and all that stuff. Like, you don't want to put yourself at risk like that. So I think going into Darlington, going into Kansas, you really want to look at drivers that are strong at these types of tracks and can get good finishes when looking at the potential for advancing.
Yeah, and I think for me, especially like digging into some of the early runs in round 16, it seems like the heavy hitters are the ones that will be standing out the most over the first three races, which is not great if you're a Bubba Wallace, if you're a Kevin Harvick, if you're a Ricky Stenhouse. Chris, what about for you? Is there anyone that's maybe flirting with the cut line that you think there's a potential for this guy to get hot? Maybe he wins one of the first two races and all of a sudden shoots up the playoff standings. Or do you think it's going to be the best, kind of separate themselves, and we're going to get an elite core four at the end?
Yeah, I think we're going to end up with the elite core four. I think that, in these first couple of races, it's more like who doesn't make big mistakes, who doesn't put themselves. I think you look at, I don't know, a guy like Chris Buescher. He's had a great season, sitting fourth in points, but he wasn't exceptional early in the season at these tracks. Now, did they find something, or was he just good at these tracks that don't mean anything? I think that that's really kind of important to look at. And, when you're looking at guys on the cut line, I mean, Ryan Blaney better get his ass, together. I mean, he's +1 on Michael McDowell. Like, who saw that coming, right? So, from a perspective of, like, is there value? I think absolutely there's value on this board, and it's Kyle Larson. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, unequivocally, 100%. This is hands down the best outright, in my opinion. Darlington, Kansas, Bristol. I don't care if he wrecks at two of those places. He's going to be the favorite or the second favorite in every one of those races, right? Yep. He was arguably the best car at Darlington, probably the second best car at Kansas. And by the way, he's really good at Bristol and on concrete tracks. So I think that this is probably the best setup for Larson. So I think that right now, if I had to take someone who I think is going to be really good at all three of those races, obviously I think it's Kyle Larson. Even if he has trouble, he can go out there and he can dominate. He could struggle at Darlington or have kind of a squirrely finish like he did earlier in the year. He'd go out there and win stage 1, stage 2 at Kansas, even have like a 12th place finish and leave there with a ton of points. And then at Bristol, kind of anything can happen. But I still think that there's a group of guys or a handful of guys that are much better at Bristol than other drivers. You can catch a setup, but for the most part, it is going to be kind of driver talent at Bristol. Yep. And there's just guys, there's horses for courses, and Bristol is one of those.
Yeah. And then, like, as you look through the rounds, round of 12, round of 8 especially, Larson stands out as a guy who could be really good at lots of tracks. And then you love to have a ticket on him at 6-1 as you head to Phoenix, where he'll probably be 2 or 3-1 going off with.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on probably where he qualifies and who else is there.
But yeah,
he was really good, obviously, in the first Phoenix race. And the other thing too is, remember, he practiced really well and qualified really well. So I think he went off at like +350 or 4-1 or something like that at Phoenix. Could have won the race. I still think that Harvick was probably the best car, super long run, but I don't think you're going to find a Harvick at Phoenix. So I still think that you're going to find the winner is going to win at Phoenix. So they still have to be good there. They don't have to be great there, because something about those top 4 cars headed to that final round, they just tend to run really well. So
I think it's interesting just looking at the playoff format. The round of 12, from my opinion, obviously not somebody that's super smart in the sport, but having Texas, Talladega, and Charlotte, for my money, I would say that's probably the most unpredictable
100%.
round of the playoffs, because none of those tracks are necessarily super high tire wear, driver centric type tracks. It's more about speed and who the hell avoids having their car blow up or a wreck.
Yeah, no, I think that's a phenomenal point. And I think that could make things interesting. And that's kind of how we got into weird situations last year, where all of a sudden Chase Briscoe might make the final four, and who knows from there. Brian, I am looking at these tracks though, and I am thinking, if there's one person that might be able to make a Chris Bell type run this year, I think it might be your boy Bubba Wallace.
Look, Bubba was good at Darlington in the spring. And yes, it took that late wreck for him to have a top 10 finish there. But I mean, when you go back and you watch that race, there was maybe 2 to 3 cars that were able to actually make passes during the day. Like, the majority of people were running in line. There was not a lot of passing going on amongst the top 10 guys. Like, you saw the majority of those top 10 cars all running in line all day. And then, Bubba at Kansas, extremely fast at that track, at those 1.5 mile intermediate places. And then if he's already locked into Bristol, they can already start setting up for the types of tracks that he loves. Talladega, Charlotte, they're going to bring plenty of speed there. And then obviously you go to the round of 8, Las Vegas, where he's good. Homestead, maybe not so much. And then Martinsville, he's getting better. But, as far as a long shot, I don't mind that.
And Chris, we've talked about kind of Bubba's temper and how that can kind of derail. Even when he's having a great race, he could get really frustrated and then kind of take himself out.
Yeah.
Even if we get him through the round of 16, the round of 12, when the pressure's mounting and we're round of 8, or maybe even flirting with a final 4 chance, like that seems like a point where it might be the kind of the end of the road for Bubba, at least at this point.
Yeah, I think it's less about the tracks that Bubba's good at and more about how does he finish on his bad tracks. What are the bad finishes? Obviously when he has a fast car, he's going to qualify well, but the mistakes kind of end his day. Like, he doesn't ever work his way back up through the field. So I don't think it's how good his good ones are. It's more how good his bad ones are going to be. And yeah, I think he's a guy, he can win at, I don't think he can win in the first round. He can get through the first round with just solid racing. Just don't make any mistakes. Then when it comes to, I think he could win at Fort Worth. Talladega, obviously, not a good road course racer, but a good super speedway racer. And then you look at the Charlotte Roval, like, just don't make mistakes. Yeah. He could find himself in a position where if he goes out and runs well at Las Vegas, he could win that race. That's a race he could actually win. He could find himself in the final 4, but he has to avoid big issues, right? One bad race in this playoffs, in his current point situation, going to be really hard to point his way onto the next round. So we're looking at wins. So if he can just keep it out of trouble, I could see him in a position to where, oh man, he'd have to do really well in Dallas. He'd have to, I think he might have to win in Dallas. And I think he could. I think he could win at Texas or Fort Worth and squeak by. Then he's going to have to win at Vegas, because I don't think Homestead and Martinsville are going to be good to him.
Yeah, I think it's if he gets to the final 4, it's because he won 2 or at least 2, probably 3 races. Brian, does anyone stand out for you as a guy who maybe is flirting with the cut line that could get real hot, win a couple races, and all of a sudden they're in the final 4, and some people didn't see that coming?
Well, I mean, obviously you have two big elephants in the room. Ryan Blaney, who's just above it. I mean, if he's all of a sudden turns it on, can win races. I mean, he won. We saw him on Sunday all of a sudden bring the fastest car without a doubt at Charlotte early in the season.
Oh man!
And then you have Kevin Harvick, who, I mean, he may not have race-winning speed, but in terms of somebody that can just run a good race and wind up with a good finish, like we saw Darlington in the spring, he's the guy. And if he can just kind of maintain and run inside the top 8, get maybe a top 5 finish in at Darlington this week, and maybe as we go to Fort Worth and then stay out of trouble at Talladega. Like, I think Kevin Harvick can make a run as somebody who's below the cut line right now.
Chris, did you have a name that popped into your head?
Yeah, I think Tyler Reddick.
Okay.
If you look at some of let's look at the last couple races. Who wins the race at Michigan if Tyler Reddick, obviously was beating Chris Buescher, has an issue, obviously loses his mind. But, if Truex couldn't pass Buescher, I don't think Buescher's passing Reddick, and I certainly don't think Truex is so I think that Reddick wins that race, right? Let's rewind to Richmond. He threw that race away by hitting the commitment cone. So those are two races that Chris Buescher ended up winning just by not making mistakes.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it's not I'm not hating on Chris Buescher. I'm just saying I think Tyler Reddick has had more speed than we thought. Where he gets discounted is the fact he hasn't gone out there and dominated on road courses. And that's where everyone expected him to be good. So
good point.
I remember that he's really good on ovals as well, especially you look at a place where the high line gets rolling. I think he could be good at Homestead. So, he's sitting at 25-1. I know we don't have a lot of road courses coming up other than Charlotte, but would anyone be shocked if he won that race? No, that moves him on, right? And so I think he could also win at a place like Kansas, a place like Bristol, or a place like Darlington. So I think my biggest sleeper, I guess you could say, would be kind of Tyler Reddick, just because I think he has the firepower to go win 2 or 3 races throughout this chase or the playoffs, and no one would be surprised.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a great call, and I think to your point, he could have potentially won 1 or 2 or maybe even a couple more races. He was right there, and then because of one incident or another. But that's kind of my fear with him, is that it seems like it's been the season where he's like right on the cusp. He has the fastest car. He should be finding victory lane, and something happens. And over the course where you have to be super consistent and super strong, I do worry a little bit about those things popping up.
You can say that about a lot of guys, though. You can say that about Denny Hamlin. You could say that about Kyle Larson, Chris Bell, Ross Chastain. So there's a lot of guys. Listen, this is an era of racing where you just can't make mistakes. This right now, this car rewards just perfect on pit road and strategy. Like I've never seen in my 12 years of betting this sport, or 13 years of betting it, where that mattered more than having a fast car. Usually if you had a fast car, like that solved all your problems. This year, it's like, okay, you better get your strategy right, number 1. And number 2, no mistakes. Those should be the most important things over having a fast car, because it's so hard to pass. It's so hard to work your way up through the field that mistakes have to be kept to a minimum. And by the way, strategy is also another one of those things where you find yourself on the wrong side, you can't recover. So I just think it's good to have speed in your car, but more importantly, you just need to keep the mistakes to a minimum and then take advantage when you do have a chance to win. And that's where Reddick has failed. So I would agree with you on that.
Brian, is there any other driver, as we're looking at the odds here, that you're jumping out or you're champing at the bit to discuss as a potential winner of the Cup Championship?
What Ross Chastain is going to show up? I know we talked about Trackhouse earlier, but like early in the season, we were talking about him. Oh man, you got to get in on his championship future, because they look like they had taken the next step from what he was able to do last year in a championship run. And all of a sudden he disappeared. But to Chris's point earlier, maybe that team with a smaller team allocated all of their resources towards the 99 to get him into the playoffs. And now that we're in the playoffs and it's only Ross, we see the return of the watermelon.
Yeah, I mean, it would be really nice to be smashing some watermelons. Talk about a guy who can be good at Kansas, can be good in Vegas, can
Darlington's one of his best tracks too.
Yeah.
Like I think that we're gonna find out this week. If he doesn't run in the top 15, his season's over. Because he was competitive in the 42 car at this track. So and he's been competitive every year that he's been at Trackhouse at this track. So this is I think this will be a pivotal week. If he can go out there and qualify, even a top 12 qualifying is good for that one car.
Okay.
And he can start making passes. I would not be shocked if he made a little run in the playoffs, and you're going to get paid on it. I mean, you're looking at 18-1. I can't see kind of what the best price is on him.
Let's see. The best number I can get you is 17. He's as short as 14. It's interesting. Some of these numbers,
18 at Westgate, if you're
okay, even better.
Super butt, yeah.
But yeah, so it's interesting though, because you can see some of these guys have a wide range of numbers. I mean, within 4, 5, 6 points. Something I was going to ask. How do you handicap drivers, Chris, when you're, like a Chastain who has looked amazing at points, has looked terrible going into the playoffs? Can you do you build a narrative up, or do you kind of try not to excuse too much poor performances? Like, how do you kind of figure that out as you're thinking about somebody who can actually win the championship?
That's a good question. I am placing more emphasis on Darlington from this year than I am his recent performance. I do think that these teams, I mean, let's look at the races since Darlington: Charlotte, Gateway, Sonoma, Nashville, Atlanta, Loudon, Pocono, Richmond, Michigan, Indy, Watkins Glen, Daytona. Tell me what one of those tracks transfers over to speed in the playoffs. Not one. Yeah. So yeah. I know that this is, it is maybe not the proper explanation. I think I'm mind reading maybe a little bit, but I refuse to believe that team that was so fast early in the year just lost speed. Yeah. If you're good at Nashville, yeah, he was good at Nashville. Okay, so concrete track, does that transfer to Bristol? No. Like, I don't know. So these races, of course, I pick the race he wins to make the argument. Like, that sucks that I happen to look over and see Nashville, and of course he dominates that race and was really fast. But Loudon doesn't matter that much. Yeah. Like, I just can't imagine that, someone's going to look back and say, well, he was good at Loudon, so he's got to be the favorite for the championship. So yeah, I do kind of give these teams a break that, maybe they're working on other things and maybe they're trying to find a feel or whatever. But I would not discount performance, like recency bias performance, from like, hey, this guy's good at Darlington. By the way, Eric Jones has been terrible this entire year. He was fast at Darlington. And so that just goes to show you this guy, like this track, especially this week, is about driver comfort. And if they're good there, I will back him at Darlington. And I do think Chastain will be good this week. If he's not, that's a sign of problems, because this is a great track for him.
And Brian, we even have Hendrick telling us that they're not really worried about this portion of the calendar. So, we can see recent performances and we can get a little frustrated with drivers, but it might be a good idea, especially when there's not a lot of corollary tracks, to just kind of let that part go and figure out who you think will be at the best at these tracks and potentially have a chance to win and move forward.
Yeah, and I also think too, like, the number is also something that's going to attract you to a guy like Chastain. Like, if he had opened for the championship at 10-1 coming into the playoffs, I don't know if I'd be really considering that. But because you can get 17-1, that has been good at most of the types of tracks that we're running in here into the playoffs, I think that's a good spot to get in on.
And Brian, I know this is going to hurt, but there's a name we haven't mentioned. You don't want to talk about him? Joey Logano. This is where he did it last year. He's obviously got some tracks coming up that he's done really well at. He could go win Vegas again, set himself up for Phoenix. Like, there's at his price, it's kind of interesting.
They don't have, like, look, in the same breath as Kevin Harvick, Logano hasn't had a race-winning car maybe more than once or twice all season, I think. Maybe even that.
Yeah, maybe.
Like, they just haven't had race-winning vehicles on Sundays, and so I hit the under 3.5 total wins for the season, and hope to God he doesn't somehow pull that out of his ass. But, like, I just don't see it happening for him. Because Blaney has been head over heels better than him with speed, and then it's just a matter of producing during the race from, like, their finishing results. But Blaney has been way better than Logano, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty fair. It is just interesting to see the defending champ. But your point is, he has not been fast. He has not shown the speed that's going to be needed. Chris, I know you're holding a few KFB tickets. How are you feeling heading into the playoffs? You excited about the potential of his run in the playoffs?
No. I early in the season I was high on him. They're just, the speed hasn't been there.
Yeah.
It's just even at races where he looked good in practice, I thought he underperformed. So they're off a little bit. I'm not excited. Now, do I think he can absolutely go out there and make his way to the Final Four? Yeah, I sure as shit hope so. Like, he could. These are good tracks for him. Darlington, Kansas, Bristol. Obviously, it's been a little cyclical for him depending on the car, but he could certainly get through those. Has he arguably been the best on plate tracks this year? I mean, if you look at Daytona, he could have won Daytona at the Daytona 500. Yep. He obviously wins at Talladega. And then we're going to go back to Talladega, but he was really good the other night at Daytona. So, I think that he could keep it out of trouble. I think that maybe him not having the best car might be the best thing for him, because he knows if he can just kind of knock out some decent finishes, accrue some points, and then it comes down to Las Vegas, Homestead, and Martinsville. Now, then he could go out there and win one of those races and find himself at Phoenix. But you have to get through those first 6 races. And I think he's done more with – now, I think he's underperformed with good cars, but he's also overperformed or outperformed with bad cars.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of – just that cream is slowly rising. I guess this is my argument for him, right? I'm trying to justify the fact that I have a lot of money on him. I do think he can get there, but if my eyeballs tell me he can't, if I had to make that decision, I just don't think they're quite there.
Yeah, like you can talk yourself into a path that totally makes sense.
I'm glad I have him at 18 and not 8, I guess.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that. So a guy like Busch, who has kind of struggled down the stretch here, would it make sense for people to just avoid the championship future and maybe just go on a weekly basis? Yes. Because I mean, if you roll all that stuff over, you're probably making, multiple times that.
Don't bet Kyle Busch to win the championship at 8-1 right now. That's just, I haven't seen it. Like, if you're going to bet someone at a short price or a shorter price, I mean, you're telling me you can get William Byron at 6-1 and Kyle Busch at 8-1. I would put all of your money on William Byron over at Kyle Busch. Not even close. If you're going to pay a short price, I like Byron way more. He's been the fastest car multiple times. And by the way, they haven't made any mistakes. His pit crew's been a weapon. Kyle Busch has just been underwhelming for most of the year. I'm glad I cashed my over 1.5 wins.
Yep.
But even those wins were, they were actually, it's kind of crazy. He was really good at Talladega, kind of won under funky circumstances, right? With the caution coming out, but really good car at California, but Larson was also out. And I still think that Chastain had a better car. The only real win was that Gateway win. And that was kind of, he just kind of dominated the weekend. Very Jimmy Johnson, go out there, lead practice, qualify in the pole, lead a lot of laps. But other than that, he's left a lot to be desired.
Yeah.
And he's kind of his own worst enemy. When we talk about pit road mistakes, most of the time it's not actually his pit crew, it's him speeding, which gets him in trouble. I mean, he's notorious for doing this type of stuff.
He's a quitter too, it seems like. I really do think that some of these cars that he could actually finish the race and maybe pick up a few more points. He's like, no, it's we're done. It's cashed. There's nothing I can do. Where you see guys riding around in nothing. And Kyle Busch, it looks like it looks like you have a little fender damage, but he's already got his window net down. He's already bitching, walking to the infield care center.
Yeah.
And I hope that he doesn't do that in the playoffs, because man, come to Charlotte Road or Charlotte Roval and down to Martinsville. These points are so damn close. You need every last one.
Yeah.
So I do think that hurts him as well.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if that changes a little bit with those points, even just at 1 or 2, meaning so much when you're talking about razor thin margins. In terms of just betting the playoffs in general, obviously these drivers are going to be more incentivized to try and win. Do you consider that when you're thinking of things like matchups, top fives, top tens? Are
Absolutely.
you okay?
I think that because strategy has become a thing, even on ovals, like I think that it's really important to understand what needs to happen for your driver to advance. And you want to make sure you're getting paid properly. You want a proper ROI for your bets. So if someone is in a must-win situation, I would not touch them in matchups.
Yeah.
Like they have to do something different. So look at it worked out. It was a miracle for Chris Bell. He ends up winning the Roval last year and then winning at Martinsville. Why? Because he went out and took tires, the easiest call ever in those situations. He was able to go down and take tires when he wasn't going to win the Charlotte Roval. Like he had no business winning that race. So that's why all of a sudden Adam Stevens gets crowned as like, oh, he's so smart. But no. He had to take 4 tires there. Like there was no, like he had to win. So yeah, there's a bunch of people that cashed a bunch of matchups because of that, but someone got paid handsomely on his outright price. So the same goes for guys that are just look at Bubba Wallace. If you had taken Bubba Wallace in matchups the last 3 weeks, he would have crushed.
Yeah.
Because he just needed to point his way. He had a lead. It was his to lose. And Bubba stayed out of trouble. And he got some great finishes at tracks where he's typically not great. So I think that you need to understand just the points and the implications of what happens if certain guys are leading or not leading, and make sure that you factor that in when you're building your card for each race.
Yeah, I think those are phenomenal points. What about the guys that are on the outside looking in? Are you less excited about betting them when it comes to outrights, or are you happy to kind of cap it like a normal regular season race and just kind of, find the value where it sits?
I mean, the guys sitting on the outside, I mean, this year's a little different than last year, where last year, we had so many winners that, you were looking at just a little bit different scenario. I don't think that there's many guys on the outside looking in, maybe a Suarez, but where's Suarez going to win, right? I mean, I would say still handicap those guys. They're still trying to get their best finishes.
Yeah.
So I think you just handicap those guys the same way you would. Like if you think they have a race winning car, like bet them to win the race, but also take them in matchups.
Yeah.
There's certain times when you just have to kind of figure, we were talking about this earlier with William Byron. I didn't love him at 6-1 to win the race at Watkins Glen, but we were able to find like a plus 350 on him to be top Chevy, just because I did think that there was a chance maybe Reddick catches a setup or all of a sudden is really good at Watkins Glen, or even Denny Hamlin could have easily won that race, or Michael McDowell in a Ford. So I think that you just have to, there's guys when they're good, you have to figure out a way to make money off of them being good, but sometimes it's not as straightforward as taking him in every matchup and paying a massive price. There's a top 5 market. There's a top 3 market. There's some group bets where you can, hey, if this guy finishes in the top 3, I'm getting paid. And maybe it's because it's a combination of a group bet and a top 3 bet, but it's, I don't know. It's really hard. I mean, Kyle has asked me this before, and it's a hard thing for me to quantify because I don't have a model. I don't just enter all the numbers in and it spits it out and then, hey, play this. I don't have that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's something I'm trying to get better at. As we get more, we do this, Brian, is figure out a way to kind of figure out where can we get better, what edges can we find. I think the one thing that we've been doing, especially lately, that's been really helping is finding different ways. So like Chris was talking about, taking William Byron as top Chevy because the top 5 market had been crushed. The top 3 market had been crushed. His outright number was gone, but there was a over 3-1 number for him to be the top Chevy, which could have easily been a top 3. And all of a sudden you're, instead of betting, minus 105 or plus 150, you're getting 3-1 on that, basically the same bet. So get paid out on your bets and find markets that haven't been absolutely demolished by the betting public.
Yeah. And it's really good to hear Chris say that, because then it makes me feel better about the fact that when I was in Vegas 2 weeks ago for Watkins Glen, I didn't actually get to put the bets in, but Circa had posted Chase Elliott matchups. with every driver against him at like plus 150 or longer. Now, I wanted to go over there and go smash those, just knowing like Elliott had to get maybe off schedule. He had to do something. He had to win that race because he did not want to go to Daytona to, have that to be the race that got him into the playoffs. And unfortunately, I didn't get to cash all these things. But yeah, I mean, they made a mistake. It wound up hitting because they tried to go long and they tried to make that decision. And yeah, so I do think that that's definitely something that both Kyle and I are definitely trying to get better at, is attacking drivers from a different angle that has a better ROI than
just because you think they're going to win doesn't mean you have to take them to win. Like, there's other ways to make money on drivers, and maybe it's a big matchup. Maybe it's like you want to do it. There's always, I would say, before a race, I have 3 or 4 guys that I want to make money on if they win or they run in the top 4. And then there's 3 or 4 guys that if they run like they did in practice, and they're bad, I can make money off of them. So you can get creative. It's important to be shopping these markets. You need access to as many, sports books as possible, or many outs as possible, just to make sure that you're able to capitalize on the drivers you think that are going to be good and the drivers that you think are going to be that are going to struggle.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Having access. Todd was tweeting a little bit about it, about the sports books and the lack of numbers they're giving us and the lack of access we're getting, and the frustration that could come from a bettor's perspective. So hopefully that gets better and we actually have a chance to bet into more markets, because this is a fun sport to bet on, and
it's great.
Always. So before we get out of here, guys, I want one thing from each of you. I want who's going to make the playoff 4? Who is your final 4 drivers to make it into the final 4? We have obviously 16 names to choose from. Brian, you can get as creative as you want. You can pepper the top of the board, however you want to do it. So Brian, I'll give you the T, and who knowing what we know now, obviously our preseason final 4 is kind of shot to ship, but there's a chance to rebound now. So who's your final 4?
I'm gonna start it off with William Byron. I just think he's been too strong all year, and to Chris's point, he can just run a race 4th, and just based on pit strategy and just knowing they have the best pit team, he can stay up there. I think I gotta go Kyle Larson. Although he struggled at times this year, I do think that the car itself has been the best on numerous occasions. I'm going to add Tyler Reddick here. I think, to Chris's point, like if anybody from the back of this group can maybe sneak a couple of wins in each, like a win in each of these rounds, if he doesn't make the mistake on Sunday, obviously. And then the 4th guy, look, I'm going to go Ross Chastain. I just think that he can somehow find his groove and he can get in there.
I like it. A little creative, a little fun. I'm gonna double dip with the Hendrick guys with you. I think Byron and Larson are in the final 4. The other 2 spots are interesting. I really want to take a flyer, and I don't know if I want to go Bubba or Buescher. I think Bubba obviously I like the way the track's set up a little bit better for him, especially in the round of 8. But Buescher has a nicer advantage, obviously, starting where he's starting. I mentioned on Twitter I was picking KFB. Kyle Busch is, I don't know, like it's been an inconsistent ride, but like I'm also picking, you're picking Ross Chastain, Ryan Blaney. And then we're just not even talking about Truex, who's been one of the fastest cars, who's been incredible at all these tracks. Makes a lot of sense. I know it's not sexy, but I'm gonna go Truex, I'm gonna go Byron, I'm gonna go Larson, and I'm gonna go Bubba.
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna stay a little more vanilla than you guys. Here's I don't think Byron and Truex make it through. I think I think one of them will make mistakes and find themselves in a must-win scenario, and I think that Byron's a little bit better at Martinsville, so I'm going to give him the nod. And he's been better on pit road. So I'm going to say Byron. I think Denny Hamlin makes it through. He's been fast week in and week out. He can win anywhere. And then this is where I think Kyle Larson's through. And here's where my hope is coming in. I'm Kyle Busch, just kind of minding his P's and Q's all the way through, and then getting there to Phoenix and seeing what happens. I wouldn't be shocked if, Tyler Reddick, I do think that there's some upside for him. I think Chris Buescher, a little overrated at this point. I think Bubba, I do think Bubba could, but I'm just not quite there with him yet. I think that
and obviously his price reflects that. So, you get a little bit better of a number, but definitely a lot of risk. He's somebody that could easily not make it to the round of 12, and you wouldn't blink and bat an eye at it. So, Chris, thank you so much for taking time and hopping on, talking all things playoffs. For more NASCAR content, make sure you are subscribed to the Stay Green podcast on the Bet the Board podcast feed. Make sure you are checking out Chris's pre-race poll every Sunday morning. I assume we're going to be rocking those through the playoffs.
Chris? All through the playoffs. Yeah.
Great interaction. Chris answers a lot of really all of our questions and helps kind of fill out that betting card. And
you want to make sure you're watching that because the markets move quickly.
Oh yeah, they've been moving like crazy. I've received a few texts like, "Hey man, it's really great what you're doing. But we need to know beforehand." I appreciate this. But the cool thing is, and I do this very selfishly, I learn from you guys. Like, when I want you guys participate, which is great. Like, I want people to be, because there's things I just miss, right? I get the blinders on, I'm looking at this and that, and all of a sudden, I had already talked about Top Chevy, how I was going to get Byron at Watkins Glen, and sure enough, Brian was like, "Dude, I think Top Chevy," and it's like, "All right, I agree too. Let's not talk about it too much." And it's just great for everybody because it's not a matter of, it's not who's right. Exactly. I don't care. I don't care if it comes from, and I hope that I'm objective enough to where if someone makes a good point, I change my mind. Like, changing your mind is a superpower. It is not about who gets it right. It's just about getting it right. And if that comes from someone else, I don't care. I don't care. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, "Oh, well, this money doesn't spend as well or spend as good because someone else gave me this bet."
Yep.
No, let's get it right. So I think that this high mind mentality where it's a bunch of people that understand the sport, that can ask questions, and like, I just give my takes, and sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. Like, I was not ready to fade Chase Elliott. Like, I've just been burned too many times, and damn it, I wish I had faded Chase Elliott across the board at Watkins Glen. So the pre-race poll, I think, is great. I think it has a lot of potential in the future. I want to get as many people in there as possible. If we get to the point where we need moderators, I think that'd be great, because then I could just have like, "Hey, let's field the right questions. Let's not deal with a lot of the other conversations." Like, everyone knows, like, I do a driver rundown. Okay. I'm going down the qualifying order, and then someone will say like, "What do you think of Chastain?" Well, Chastain qualified 28th. I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
Like, but you guys have been super helpful in interacting. It makes me smarter, and hopefully that the betting public kind of can take advantage of that as well.
Yeah, and I think it's good. Like, there's different things that are getting the community involved, getting people more interested. Sometimes it's really easy to get into your lane and just focus on the same stuff and not really think about, "Oh, that might make sense this week," or "This is a different angle I hadn't thought about." So it's always good to chat with everybody and kind of build up a community and eventually build NASCAR up so it's not the very bottom of the pecking order, and from a casino perspective, and we can
below table tennis,
we can actually get numbers, and we can actually have fun stuff to bet and get more matchups and get more exposure. So I think all these things that we're all doing is awesome for the community, and I'm just pumped to have this going. So for Chris Werme, for Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert. We'll be back tomorrow to break down Darlington. So make sure you are subscribed. Make sure you hit that thumbs up, and make sure you go over to Chris's channel and hit subscribe there as well. I'll link it in the bio. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next time.